Ramesses III saved Egypt when a massive alliance of invaders called the Sea Peoples tried to conquer the entire eastern Mediterranean, toppling empires as they marched. He crushed them in 2 decisive battles, land and sea. Then his own household killed him anyway. For 3,000 years, Egypt's priests insisted the plot against him failed completely, and every history book that followed simply repeated their version, word for word, without question. Modern forensic science just proved every single one of them wrong. This is the story of 4 decisions, made by 4 different people standing close to the throne. Each decision looked reasonable in the moment. Together, they dragged Egypt's most powerful family straight into murder. Ramesses III ruled Egypt from around 1186 to 1155 BC, the final years of the 20th dynasty. He was the last pharaoh strong enough to hold the crumbling new kingdom together by force. He crushed the Sea Peoples in massive land and naval battles around 1175 BC, battles so decisive that the walls of his own mortuary temple at Medinet Habu still display the carvings today, 3,000 years later. Picture that same temple wall today, rows of carved soldiers, chariots, and captured enemies stretching across stone that has survived 3,000 years of sun and sand. Those carvings were meant to broadcast one message, that this pharaoh was untouchable, protected by the gods themselves. Nobody carving those walls imagined the greater threat would come from inside his own household. But the danger that finally killed him wasn't waiting at any border. It was already living inside his own palace walls, sharing his bed, and raising a son he trusted completely. Egyptian pharaohs kept one official chief wife, but also dozens of secondary wives, all housed together in a private royal compound historians call a harem, sealed off from the rest of the palace. One of those secondary wives was a woman named Tai. She had given Ramesses a son, a boy named Pentar, and she loved him the way any mother loves her only path to power. But Pentar was never going to inherit anything. The throne legally belonged to the son of the chief queen, a boy also named Ramesses, already recognized as heir. Tai watched her son's entire future close in front of her, year by year. No crown, no army, no fortune waiting for him. Just permanent exile from the royal bloodline that actually mattered. She faced a choice most people in her position never dared to make, accept the exile quietly and disappear from history, or force her son onto the throne by any means necessary. Tai chose the second option. And she had exactly the kind of access a plot like this needed, insider knowledge of the guards' schedules, the palace layout, and the pharaoh's own daily routine. She began recruiting allies inside the palace itself. A royal chamberlain with access to the king's private chambers. A troop commander who controlled soldiers. Harem officials who moved freely in and out. Every person Tai brought into the plot knew a piece of the plan. And every person she brought in was also one more mouth that could eventually talk, under torture or under oath. That was the price of her first decision. To kill a living god, she needed dozens of accomplices, and that sprawling network made total secrecy impossible from the very beginning. Egypt's own court records, preserved on the judicial papyrus of Turin, eventually named more than 40 people connected to Tai's plot. Nearly all of them worked somewhere inside the palace. Access alone wasn't enough to kill a pharaoh protected by guards, priests, and centuries of royal ritual. So the conspirators turned first to something they trusted completely: magic. A palace magician shaped wax figures of guards and officials, using spellbooks stolen from the royal library, spells meant only for use by the king himself against Egypt's enemies. Wax figures alone wouldn't stop a man's heart. So the conspirators smuggled poison and additional cursed objects through harem women who held rare permission to leave the compound and enter the outside world. They still needed something faster and more certain, a weapon close enough to reach his throat, carried by someone inside his own guard, someone Ramesses trusted enough to stand near him unarmed. Officials across the palace were bribed with gold, land grants, and promised promotions, whatever it took to buy silence from men whose entire job was protecting the king from exactly this. The final plan stacked 3 separate methods on top of each other: a curse, a poison, and a blade. If one method somehow failed, the conspirators wanted a second and third ready. That redundancy made the plot more likely to succeed. It also became its second major cost. More methods meant more people preparing them, and more physical evidence eventually left behind for judges to find. The attack came during a religious festival, when palace security always relaxed, and the royal compound filled with priests, dancers, musicians, and dozens of unfamiliar faces moving freely through the crowd. Picture the scene: torchlight flickering across courtyard walls, incense smoke drifting through the crowd, priests chanting while dancers and musicians moved between guests nobody fully recognized. In that kind of controlled chaos, a single unfamiliar face barely registered. That was exactly the cover the conspirators had been waiting for. Somewhere inside that crowd, a blade finally reached Ramesses III's throat. The cut was devastating, deep enough to slice nearly through to the bone of his own spine. He almost certainly didn't die instantly. Centuries later, forensic scans would show that ancient embalmers carefully packed the wound with a protective amulet before sealing his body for its journey into the afterlife. Yet the official record written about that night says almost nothing at all. Just one vague line, that the pharaoh went to his horizon. No blade. No blood. No mention of murder. That silence wasn't an accident or an oversight. It was the opening move in a cover-up so effective it would take 3,000 years, and a hospital-grade CT scanner, to finally undo. Ramesses IV, the true heir, took the throne immediately and ordered a formal trial. He needed the entire kingdom to believe the assassination plot had completely failed. The result survives today as the Judicial Papyrus of Turin, a detailed court record naming more than 40 conspirators dragged in front of a specially appointed panel of Egyptian judges. Harem women, royal officials, military officers, even the palace magician who had carved the wax figures. All of them were named individually, formally judged, and sentenced according to their exact role. Many conspirators were forced to take their own lives inside the courtroom itself, rather than face public execution, a small mercy extended to people who had tried to murder a living god. Pentor, Ty's own son, was among the condemned. He was forced to end his own life, then buried not as a prince, but wrapped in the ritually unclean skin of a goat. In Egyptian religious belief, that burial wasn't just a punishment for one single lifetime. It was specifically designed to block his soul from ever entering the afterlife, forever, with no exceptions. Even the judges themselves weren't entirely clean. Several were later put on trial a second time, accused of drinking with and fraternizing improperly with harem women during the original proceedings. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss what's next. The court's final written decision was simple and deliberate: record every single punishment in exhausting detail, except the one fact that actually mattered, that the pharaoh had truly died from his wound. For nearly 3,000 years, Egyptologists read that same trial record and reached the same careful conclusion: the assassination attempt against Ramesses III must have somehow failed. After all, the papyrus never states outright that Ramesses III is dead. It only lists conspirators and their punishments, written in the cautious language of a royal court, not a coroner's report. Textbooks repeated that same theory for generation after generation. Ramesses III supposedly survived the attack, ruled on for years afterward, and eventually died naturally of old age on the throne. Nobody could definitively prove otherwise. His mummy had already been studied for well over a century, wrapped in linen bandages that no researcher wanted to risk damaging just to check his throat. A second, unnamed mummy connected to the case had actually been known since 1886, when archaeologist Gaston Maspero first unwrapped it and found a body contorted in apparent agony, sealed inside that same unclean goatskin. Some scholars argued that wound on Ramesses himself could be an embalmer's cut, made carefully after death, rather than a fatal injury inflicted while he was still alive. The truth stayed locked inside undisturbed bandages. In 2012, Egyptologist Zahi Hawass and radiologist Sahar Salim made a decision nobody had made before: run a full, non-invasive CT scan straight through the ancient linen wrappings. No unwrapping. No damage to a 3,000-year-old body. Just detailed digital X-ray slices, captured layer by layer, straight through the resin, the linen bandages, and finally the mummified skin and bone itself. What the scan revealed ended a century-long scholarly debate almost instantly. A deep wound sliced directly into his throat, cutting nearly all the way through to the spinal column underneath. It was a wound absolutely no one could have survived, not for years, not even for days. The published study in the British Medical Journal confirmed it. The killers hadn't failed at all. Buried inside that exact wound, embalmers had hidden a small protective amulet shaped like the Eye of Horus, placed there deliberately during mummification, almost like an attempt to heal what they couldn't undo. The same research team also scanned that second, unnamed mummy from 1886, still wrapped in the impure goatskin, and ran DNA comparisons directly against the royal family line. The genetic results lined up closely with Ramesses III's own family. Scientists now believe that unnamed body is Pentar, executed for the exact plot his own mother built to crown him. The official story Egypt's priests carefully wrote back in 1155 BC survived almost completely intact for 3,000 years. A single CT scanner undid all of it in one afternoon. Every decision in this story bought someone something they wanted badly. Tai bought her son a real shot at the throne. The judges bought the new pharaoh a clean, believable legacy. None of them actually got to keep what they'd won. Pentar lost both his life and his eternal afterlife. Ramesses III lost his throat, and for millennia, the true story of his own death. Ramesses III still ranks among Egypt's greatest warrior kings, the man who personally saved the entire New Kingdom from foreign invasion in a single remarkable lifetime. But that greatness never protected him from the people standing closest to him. A mother protecting her son's future turned out to be more dangerous than any invading foreign army ever was. It took modern radiology, 3,000 years later, to finally catch what ancient priests had spent their entire careers carefully covering up. The murder was real. The cover-up nearly worked forever. If a palace guarded by soldiers, priests, and centuries of sacred ritual couldn't protect a living god from his own family, what does that actually say about anyone who trusts the people closest to them?